So welcome back, part two. We are going to start our journey of GCR looking at governance. And I want to start with a quote here. The quote is by Stephanie Balaoris. I cannot pronounce her name. My apologies, Stephanie. She is a VP and Research Director at Forrester Research, and she said this about cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is much more than an IT topic. It's a critical business concern. And that's what we're doing in these next two chapters, is aligning technology with business. Okay. And that does start with governance. So when we look at governance, the key role of governance as it pertains to cybersecurity, our focus, it serves as the cornerstone for navigating the complex landscape of cyber threats, right? Not to mention the complexity or the maze of laws and standards that we might decide to comply with. Well, we don't decide to comply with laws. Laws and regulations, we have to do that, right? But what framework do we use? Where do we go? And that starts with governance, okay? It becomes the strategy for all of this, the strategy for establishing rules, right? It creates that resilient framework all the way embedding into the culture of the organization this idea of security, right? From the end user. We've talked about, security starts with the end user, phishing threats, all that good stuff, not giving out your username and password, etc., right? When we embed governance, we embed it throughout the process. So all of GCR is affected by governance because it starts with us creating those internal rules, okay, policies, procedures of how we're going to implement our strategic cybersecurity plan. So it's not just a standalone, if you will. Now, as a reminder, when we see a term followed by an orange definition, it's a term we need to remember. And I can't encourage you enough. Take notes as you go through this. You'll find you remember more, even if you don't have to go back and reread your notes. So, governance, the process of how an organization is managed, right? Usually includes all aspects of how decisions are made for the organization, such as policies, roles, procedures, as in cybersecurity. But this is overall governance as well, right? This is not just governance within security. This is governance throughout the entire organization. And of course, our governance affects our culture and how things get done within the organization. Right? Are we an organization that supports change and encourages change and challenges our human assets to challenge us, to challenge the company, to create a better company, right? So it is a pivotal role. It shapes how organizations manage and secure their operations as it pertains to cybersecurity. It sets those boundaries, those rules, those paths for navigating this complexity of GCR. Oh, did I just miss a slide? Nope, just want to make sure. Now, security governance, right, takes that huge governance topic and brings it down with that focus. It is the policies, roles, processes that the organization uses to make security decisions in an organization. Now, this doesn't just mean digital asset security. It's physical security. Okay, it's security across the organization. Our focus tends to be the digital assets, right? But in securing those digital assets, we have to think about physical security, locking down rooms, access to buildings, the whole 9 yards. And that is determined at what level we're going to do all that within governance. So focus on security. Again, proactive and reactive measures. By the way, I do suggest you pause and read these slides, okay? A lot of this is coming from the textbook that you may have access to. If you're watching this online, you'd like the textbook, reach out. Happy to give it to you, all right? So effective security governance ensures that security measures are both reactive, and immediate threats, and proactive. So anticipating future challenges, what's coming down, what's the latest threat, and how can we easily shift to meet that latest threat without having to go through the whole process of governance discovery again, right? It aligns with objectives. It aligns with our company's mission, its vision, its goals, which of course tend to change. So we always want to be thinking about that overarching mission of the company and making sure that we're not infringing on that mission, not infringing on that vision, not infringing on the goals of the organization, short-term and long-term, with GCR. So policies are what come from this process, right? Organization-wide directives that set the overall security goals and guidelines for protecting information and systems. And that becomes the rules. That's where we start, right? The policies are, in fact, the foundation. They provide the necessary framework for all security-related activities, decisions, investments, the whole 9 yards. Okay? And of course, there is a tailored development. So, policies must be developed with a comprehensive understanding of the organization. Again, policies back to mission, vision, goals. Okay? We need to meet those risks. We need to incorporate all of the stakeholders. Remember, a lot of times when we do this, we overlook the end user, and the end user tends to be the expert as to the risk of the data they're putting into the system. So we have to include them. It's just like in project management, folks. The biggest mistake I see in project management, you build a system, a software application, and you never reached out to the end users who are going to use it, who end up not using it the way you intended because it's a pain in the butt, right? We did it at the top, meeting top needs, but we're not going to get the data we want. We're not going to get the security we want because we didn't include the end user. That holds true here as well. Get down to those departments. Get to the finance folks who know what regulations, what laws they need to follow as we create these. Procedures is that step-by-step instruction that detail the exact actions required to implement these. So how do we implement those policies? Through these procedures. Okay? And again, we audit all this constantly. These procedures give us an audit mechanism to make sure, well, we have a procedure as it pertains to encryption of PII. Did we follow it in creating this new system, in moving data, whatever the case may be? So translating policies into actionable procedures, it's crucial in shaping the security culture within the organization, because this is what the end user is going to need to follow, what the IT administrator will need to follow, the network administrator, application developers, as well as leadership. So keep that in mind as well. We all need to make this cooperative, because we can create policies and procedures that then just don't get implemented. I've been in organizations like that. It's like, well, here's the policy, but nobody follows it. In which case, what was the value of spending the time creating the policy that no one is, initiating, right? Or following, for that matter. Standards, so specific mandatory criteria. This comes from those laws, those regulations. It may become voluntary and involuntary, right? Laws and regulations, involuntary. You better do it. You better follow GDPR. But what about ISO? Right? Depending on your organization, that may be more of a framework, than requirements. But we can voluntarily take those on as standards to help us develop a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy. So consistency and compliance comes from these standards. That's why they exist. It's not just to make our lives miserable, all right? Regulations and laws, those are the legal requirements established by governing bodies to mandate specific measures, and we see those in place. So, be assured that there's models, there's frameworks, and then there's these regulations and laws, and we have to follow these. If not, there are consequences. All right, so configuration management is sort of the next step. When we talk about configuration management, it's a process and a discipline used to ensure that only changes made to systems are those that have been authorized. So as we're in project management, for example, and our project always has a focus on security, any changes that are made in that project need to be noted. Now, change management or configuration management is not just about software or system development. We take this all the way to the fact of we have a policy that says if you're going to work on our firewall, you have to do that with someone else monitoring your work that you do or being notified of the work you're doing so that they can go back and audit that if you were opening a port to test something, that the port got closed because we're not using it for now, right? So this happens through a process called request for change, okay? Large data centers have to do this all the time. Why? Because if they don't, one change in one data center may impact all others. So they do these requests for changes. They go to a committee or an part of the organization that says, okay, they want to make this change. They look at what's the impact of the change, what's the risk of the change, how long is the change going to take effect, is this a permanent change? There needs to be this process. And again, this mechanism becomes an audit trail for change within the organization as it pertains, in our case, to a cybersecurity strategy. Now, this may seem a little out of place, and it is, but I want to cover it. When we think about policies and procedures, we have to have policies and procedures of what we do when we dispose of data, when we dispose of hardware that we're no longer using. Even though we've transferred all that data to a new server, we have the old server, all of that data exists, we have to get rid of it. I'm going to bring you back just a little bit, back to when I was in and everything was done in backup tapes. Backup tapes are still used today, so I'm bringing this up. Degaussing is the technique of erasing data off the disk or tape, okay? And if you ever run into me, ask me about when I worked at JELD-WEN and how a manager continued to lose data off a floppy drive. It's a great story as to what happened. So here, what we're doing is, we're wiping those magnetic media devices of data, especially tapes. Today, modern disposal is data sanitation. It's the process of permanently removing or destroying digital data. And again, rules and regulations can come into play as well as policies and procedures within the organization. Some organizations say when we're done with hardware, we're not going to invest the time in, running kill disk and overwriting that data enough that we know it cannot be recovered. And thus we can give away that media at that point, which I wish more organizations would do. Okay, but it is a time-consuming process. What do they do instead? Well, they take the hard drive out, they stick it under a chop saw, whoop, chop it up, good to go, done. And then there's no way of getting that data back, all right? So same thing as we, transition into solid state. So integration with governance, configuration management, it's integrated into the broader governance framework that we put into play. And that's really what we need to know about this. All of this stuff intertwines and plays together. So that's it for this section. In part 3, we will transition from governance into compliance. See you then.